we always wonder, is there life beyond the stars? We see so much in the news, and we have been taught so much over the years of our lives, we almost don't know what to believe. But today's guest, Dr. Stephen Greer, is an expert in the field of UFOlogy, if you will. He's the founder of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Global Disclosure Project, which seeks to disclose the alleged classified UFO information. Please welcome medical doctor, Dr. Stephen Greer. What's up, buddy?
Good to be with you. Great seeing you. I love being on your show.
Absolutely. Dr. Greer, we got so much to cover. I've watched you over the years. I know your work. I have seen your films. I want to be enlightened today.
Okay. We'll do it.
Let's go back to the beginning. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in North Carolina. I actually did a Chapel Hill residency. I'm an emergency and trauma doctor, medical doctor. As I grew up there, from a very, very poor family. We lived in a 2-room shack with no heat, no air conditioning. Put myself through high school, college, med school. Was very involved in a lot of avant-garde issues even back then. Believe it or not, I had an African-American girlfriend in North Carolina 50 years ago. That was dangerous. I'm talking dangerous. But it was great. We grew up in a very modest background, but worked hard, got through med school, had 3 kids in med school, but got involved with this. My mom's oldest brother worked on the lunar module, that first machine that landed on the moon in 1969. And that was a Northrop Grumman. Back then it was just Grumman, it became Northrop Grumman. And he had his whole career there. And so I had a very keen interest in all of this. And when I was about 8 years old, I actually saw one of these extraterrestrial vehicles, broad daylight. This would have been about 1963 in North Carolina. And I was with my twin sister and some boys in the neighborhood. Now, my parents said, "Oh, you didn't see that? Those don't exist." I said, "Yeah, they do. People need to believe their children when they see something, honestly." So it ignited a lifelong interest. And I talked to my uncle about it. He was very supportive. He'd heard things, being a big aerospace engineer guy, working on the Apollo mission, landing on the moon, right? So I began digging into it and studying it, and here we are, 60 years later. It went from 63 to 2023. I've been digging into this. It's a deep dive.
Okay, before I get into your professional career, I just want to understand you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
You're raised, are you in a religious family? Does your family believe in a higher power?
Well, no, my family were more humanistic. They weren't religious at all, but they were open-minded, about things. My dad was Navy, World War II. Neither of them, had a religious viewpoint. But I had some experiences when I was 17. I got very sick and died. I had a near-death experience. And I learned that the conscious mind is actually based in sort of an infinite field of awareness, is sort of this concept of the cosmic mind. So I had this phenomenal experience. And that introduced me to some ideas and concepts and experiences that led me to dig into this whole question of life in outer space and intelligent life elsewhere very deeply. And about 6 months after that near-death experience, I had a major encounter with an ET craft. And that was up in the mountains of North Carolina in October 1973. So there's a long kind of history of that. But, my birth family, if it didn't fit in a test tube, they didn't think it existed. I mean, they just were not at all religious.
Would it be safe to say that they were atheists?
Agnostic, more, just didn't know, didn't care. They grew up in hyper-religious families and but very fanatical and strict, and so they kind of rebelled against that. So my parents were like over it. So that was their orientation. So I was sort of a clean slate. I was open-minded about things, but I didn't have any, let's call it indoctrination that you get from organized religion, which I think was probably a good thing because it gave me a more universal perspective in the long run.
You mentioned that you had a near-death experience.
Yeah.
How did you die?
Being a dumb teenage boy, I had injured my left thigh, and it got infected. And I had my own little apartment in high school because we were so poor. I ended up getting my own place, and I bicycled from Charlotte all the way to the North Carolina coast, 200 miles with this injury. It got infected, spread all through my quadricep muscle on my left leg. And, oh man, I was sick. And I said, well, I better get home. So I bicycled 200 miles back. And we were so poor, we didn't have health insurance. I didn't have to see a doctor. And so I just laid there. I got sicker and sicker and sicker. I went into renal failure, kidney failure, and liver failure from the infection, sepsis, and died. But I was by myself. So I had this amazing experience. And I didn't have any religious part of it. It was more unbounded consciousness and experiencing the cosmos and sort of the state of oneness. Beautiful. But it was so profound. And actually, after I came back into my body, I was spontaneously healed. I never saw a doctor. My fever broke. I became completely normal the next day, and it was one of these kind of miraculous things. But so I guess it wasn't my time to leave back then. But that was in the spring of '73. It was 50 years ago. But so that sort of informed a lot of my perspective on life, and but also it helped me with some other things, and that is, if you face that, you're not going to be afraid of death. And so I have sort of I call it the spirit warrior mindset, where I'm just not afraid of if I get threatened, and I've been threatened plenty with what I'm doing, because I'm sort of the lead guy trying to move a lot of really big top secret programs to the public fore in a way that's helpful. And there have been a lot of threats and, things happen, but it doesn't stop me at all. It can be concerning, but it's not stopped me. So I think that experience was very good preparatory. If there was some larger plan from some higher power, it was probably gave me all these experiences so that I could stay the course on what my task is here.
Back in those days, near-death experiences, they weren't taken as serious as they're taken today. Many people who had those experiences, they were doubted. They weren't believed. People dismissed their claims of there being something more. But we now know that consciousness, if you will, our conscious doesn't end when our heart stops beating. It doesn't end when our physical life as we know it no longer exists. Correct. Anybody who I've ever read about or seen documentaries on, they've never come back the same. They've always come back with a different level of awakening. Would you say, and interestingly enough, most come back with a more, and I don't know if I want to call it religious, but there's a deeper level of belief, if you will.
Well, I think it's a deeper level of knowing. So I call it spiritual and conscious, as opposed to religion, which connotes organized religion, which are structures of organization. So I think I make a distinction between sort of a universal spirituality and a discipline, which is fine, whether it's, this religion or that religion. But I think at the root of all of that, the foundation of it is a spiritual consciousness and knowledge. And it has less to do for me with belief than knowledge, because belief is sort of knowledge of things not yet known. But if you know it and have experienced it, then it's known. And that's why I always tell people, no, I don't believe in UFOs. You believe in the tooth fairy. But if you've seen one, and if you've dealt with classified projects, and you've dealt with the actual phenomenon directly, where you have dispositive knowledge, proof, then it's not belief. It's like, well, do I believe in this camera I'm looking at? Well, I mean, it's not a correct use of the word belief. So I think in this case, as a scientist, I make a distinction between the belief in something, or what your paradigm and belief is, and what the facts are. And the facts on this are, quite frankly, overwhelming to anyone who takes a even cursory look at it.
I don't know if I got my timeline right. Did I hear you say 6 months after your near-death experience, you saw the UFO?
Yeah. Well, I had one that I saw when I was 8. And then when I was 17 and had the near-death, 6 months after that, I'd turned 18. I was away at college, and I was up in the mountains of North Carolina, and had a major, very close encounter, which was the foundation for our starting close encounters of the fifth kind, which is when humans initiate contact with these civilizations.
Okay, stop there for 1 second. Is this random? Now that you're in your 60s, do you look back over the course of your life and say, I was chosen? Because most people can go their entire life and have no interaction with alien species. They're never going to see a UFO. Right. But within a 10-year span, you saw your first UFO, you had a near-death experience, and you saw your second. Do you believe this was always going to be my destiny?
Yeah, probably. Although, you know what, I think it's a misinterpretation of an old phrase. It's called, many are called, but few are chosen. I don't think that's true. I think many are called, but few choose to answer the call. All right. In other words, you have to see, is you have to step up to that. You have free will. You have to step up to responsibility. It's like I was on a flight, and some dude in row 9 died, had a heart attack. Now, all our lawyers say, don't step into that because you'll get sued. We used to have Good Samaritan laws. Now doctors get sued if they help anyone do anything on the street. And I said, well, I'm not going to let that man die. So I went back and ran a code blue and defibrillated him, got his heart started back. Now, I chose to do that. A lot of doctors would have stayed in their seat, not gotten up because of the risk of being sued, because there's an ambulance chasing the lawyer on every street corner. But, excuse me for saying so. But, I said no. So I think there are many people have an opportunity and they take a pass. So I think where the rubber meets the road on so much of life is there is a need. Do you choose to answer it and do that or not? Now, it could be that there could be some destiny involved or some pathway, or the Buddhists would call it dharma, your life's work and path. I believe that, but you could also choose not to do it. You could choose to walk the other way. So this is the mystery of the choices we make. But, if we're made in the image of a greater being, one of those is having the creative ability to choose or not choose and use our free will. I think we're at a time now where a lot of people need to make the right choices very quickly, given what's happening on this planet. And so that's where it gets into, to me, that's the ultimate, not religious, but moral or spiritual question, is what choices we make.
Got you. And just for the sake of our audience in establishing your credentials, you are a medical doctor. You don't just have doctor in front of your name for no reason. Where did you study, and where did you practice, and how long did you practice?
Well, I studied in Tennessee, and then did my Chapel Hill residency in North Carolina, and then practiced in North Carolina for a couple of decades. And then I'm still current. I still keep my stuff current, but I'm not in the emergency department anymore. Besides, I'm too old for that. That's a tough gig, my friend. But so that's sort of my background. And during that period, what's interesting is back in the day when I'm running this emergency department, I'd been chairman of emergency medicine And I got involved with this issue. And by 1993, when Bill Clinton got elected, I was asked to fly up to Washington to brief the administration and his first director of the CIA. So I'm a young doctor in my 30s being asked to brief the CIA director on this issue, which was turned my life upside down at that point. And I'll tell you why, is that when I went to that meeting, the CIA director, the FedEx I got from my contact to him setting it up said, you're going to be the first person to brief the director of the CIA and this administration on this, because they had just gotten sworn in January of 93. And I thought, this has got to be nonsense. There's no way that the President of the United States and the Director of CIA have made inquiries into the UFO issue and were denied access. It turns out it wasn't nonsense. It was the truth, that there were projects that were being run illegally, rogue, dealing with UFOs, that had denied the president access and his first director of the CIA. So R. James Woolsey. So that meeting was sort of my coming of age. How old would I have been? 37, something like that. And I thought to myself, how, in what universe can there be something this classified that the acting director of the CIA and the President of the United States doesn't have access? So once I learned that was the situation, I started drilling down on it further and started pulling together the first group of whistleblowers, top secret guys who'd been in these projects, and putting information together, and began to, ad hoc sort of create a network that's now led to what we call the Disclosure Project globally 30 years later. But that's how it all started. And it started because, here's the funny thing about it. It didn't start because I was doing anything with the government. I was with a group of people down on a beach near Pensacola, Florida. And we were doing a Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind contact experiment, where a group of people went out. We were attempting to make contact with one of these civilizations. And we had 4 of these UFOs just pop, materialize in the sky right in front of us. And so at that point, we actually got a video of it, but it's not very good. It was like an old high-8, and a photograph ended up on the front page of the Pensacola paper of this. So the guy who had been head of our Army intelligence and special forces contacted me, General Albert Stubblebine III, and some other folks who were not happy with the fact that that we were doing this, because they thought we were stepping on their toes, making open contact like this. And so it began a process where then some of the friendly guys in the system, like this friend of the CIA director, found out about this event and asked me to come up and provide these briefing materials for the president and the CIA director. So, I mean, this is a very long story, made very short. So that's sort of what happened.
Okay. In the early 90s, you're still a medical doctor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did this for years as a doctor. I was, by day and night, I'm a trauma guy, and then I'm in between that, flying up to Washington, going places doing this. It was kind of a through the looking glass life. Well, it still is, but most certainly was then, and also for my family.
I asked you if you were still practicing medicine in the early 90s because the leader of the free world at that time, President Clinton, and his CIA director called you.
Yeah.
Technically, they could have called anybody on planet Earth. What made you this leading expert that they would seek you out and say, hey, we need you to come to the White House and brief us in an area that is highly, highly classified?
Well, I think 2 things. One is they knew that we knew enough that we had effectively made contact with one or more of these civilizations. They knew that. They'd seen the footage. They knew the event. Number 2, I know they knew that my uncle was Northrop Grumman, big aerospace guy. And number 3, they knew that I had been studying this and had collected enough evidence that, I would know my way around. I know my way around much better now than I did 30 years ago, obviously. But And they didn't have anyone else to turn to. You have to understand. And by the way, this meeting was not at the White House. It was off-site in near the Pentagon, but it was not at the White House. The more important meetings don't happen there. But so we ended up, I think they reached out to me because of a good friend of the CIA directors who had a think tank, a military think tank there in Arlington, Virginia, near the Pentagon. Took a great interest in what we were doing, had done about a year and a half earlier. And he reached out and at the request of the CIA director and the Clinton administration. So that's how it happened. I didn't approach anyone. They approached me, and I said, okay, I'll come up. And that's really how the genesis of this occurred. And then I found out there were some folks who were very supportive of getting this information out. And there were ones who were extremely opposed to it, and it was very dangerous. Subsequently, the president got threatened. George H.W. Bush specifically threatened him, told him to butt out. I know this for a fact. Clinton did try to stand up an operation to penetrate those projects, which was not fully successful, and it ended up being subverted. And so, I was involved with that way back 30 years ago. But I think that, ultimately we, had some meetings at the Rockefeller Ranch with me and a group of researchers, Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch out in the Tetons. And the following summer, Lawrence Rockefeller hosted the president to go through this material. But I think he increasingly realized it was too dangerous for him. I mean, one of his good friends came to my home and blurted out in front of my kids. I told him, don't talk like this. He said, they're concerned if the president pushes on this, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy, quote unquote. So I burst out laughing, thinking this is the biggest bunch of nonsense I've ever heard. He's got Secret Service, he's got this. And they said, no, the organization that wants this stuff kept under wraps, he is no match for that. So that's when I realized this was a very grave, serious situation. And I learned subsequently from meeting with people who all the way back to Eisenhower. If you look at our YouTube channel, we have 70 or 75 top secret guys' testimony up there. One of them was a young White House Signal Corps guy who had been in Eisenhower's White House the last year of his administration, and found out that Eisenhower had been pushed aside and had lost control over these operations. So the super secret world of dealing with extraterrestrial vehicles, the ones that we've downed and crashed and retrieved and studied, the technology transfer where we've come up with advanced technologies that fly, that are man-made, that look like a UFO. We'll get into this. All that began in the 40s and 50s. But by the time Eisenhower, in his last term, what really happened is that the president trusted some people he shouldn't have. And they basically subverted him and pushed him out of operational control. He was in favor more of an open contact situation with these civilizations and the bringing forward of these technologies for peaceful purposes. There were others that wanted to weaponize them, keep them secret. And of course, the big industrialists, I mean, people like Paul Mellon, a billionaire, his grandson's on my team. Those guys did not want to upset the apple cart of big oil. And, you look at how these UFOs move. I always tell people, let's demystify this. Go look at what, the Pentagon has confirmed, that those tic-tac, what they call the tic-tac, and these other UFOs we've chased off the coast here, California and Norfolk, and we have footage for. And the Pentagon's confirmed they're real 3D objects. You can splice those into here, and I say, look at that thing move. I mean, it's moving, straight up, straight down, has no rockets, no jets, doesn't have an atomic power plant on board, no heat signature. And it's an electromagnetic field propulsion. But every one of those, this is the big story no one knows. Those weren't extraterrestrial. Those are ours. Those are coming out of the Lockheed Skunk Works in Northrop and EG&G and Raytheon. I know where they're made. I know who's worked on them. I mean, this is my family legacy. So I tell people, look, I mean, this stuff would, if you look at it, that's an alternative energy device. That is not consuming anything you're burning. And so if you were to put something that was stationary, in other words, sitting at your house or in your car, but not flying, that was pulling that kind of energy out of what's called the 0 point field of energy, you'd have no power bill, there'd be no pollution, and within 20 years, all poverty on Earth would be over. So the secrecy around this, however, is the reverse. If you have a handful of global super powerful interests that are controlling literally $1,000 trillion worth of assets, dealing with fossil fuels, nuclear, internal combustion engine, car engines, jets, rockets, all the oil, gas, coal in the ground, all the commodities trading based on that, it's well over $2 quadrillion. $1,000 trillion. So there's the rub, is that whether it's 2023 or 1953, those interests, which actually have more power than we, the people, the Congress and the presidency and what have you, they're the ones calling the shots on this, I assure you, not the president. Now, the myth that we've all been sold is that we have a free press, and we do on certain things, but not on this, and that we have a democracy, a democratic republic that's intact. That got subverted, and there was essentially an unacknowledged coup d'etat between 1956 and 1960. That's just the truth. And we have not gotten back on track since, and there are dire consequences of this, because if you have a rogue organization with that kind of technology where they've studied extraterrestrial vehicles and created very advanced technologies that have also been weaponized, now you're creating a situation where an unsupervised rogue group like that, that's basically a power unto itself. You remember Senator Daniel Inouye of the Senate from Hawaii. He said, I'm paraphrasing, but you can look this up, there exists a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself. Now, this is the ranking senator on Intelligence Committee and et cetera. Now, that is the world I had to step into in the 90s, but I didn't know that. Now, when I first got involved with this, I had no idea that we were looking at that kind of problem and dysfunction. But, it was a very fast learning curve for me from 1993 to 95.
Dr. Greer, you have covered so much.
Oh,
and,
did I?
Oh, my God, you covered so much.
All right, we can unpack it.
We're going to get, because I am truly fascinated by your work. And we're going to get to much of this in as much detail as possible. But I also want to do it in a way that the not so smart guys like myself understand what you're saying.
Oh, you're plenty smart.
I want to go backwards with a couple of things before we move forward.
Sure.
President Clinton, he actually did an interview, and he was and I'm not sure if it was done with Larry King, but he was asked directly, do UFOs exist? He said no. And he said it very definitively. Is his response, in your opinion, based on the fact that his life was in jeopardy?
He was ordered not to speak about it. Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm here, actually, Saturday, I'm going to see a guy who's a very famous Hollywood figure who I can't name, who has written up an affidavit about him being with Bill Clinton after Clinton left office with another big singer celebrity in a limo. And this celebrity asked Bill Clinton about this. He says, oh, yeah, they exist. And he said, go read the Day After Roswell, the book that Colonel Corso wrote about retrieving these extraterrestrial objects from in 1945 in Roswell. But he also said that George H.W. Bush had waved him off and told him, this is none of your business, butt out if you know it's good for you. And by the way, Jimmy Carter had the same thing happen. President Carter was way before my time, but I was actually with him at Obama's inauguration. But he had a sighting, And he ran on a platform saying he was going to disclose these UFO secrets in 1976. At that time, George H.W. Bush came to him also and said, you're not going to find out anything about this, and you're not going to be told anything about it. So there are certain people who've been involved on a very high committee. It's international, dealing with this. George H.W. Bush was one of those figures. Before him, people like Paul Mellon, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, in the 90s, 90 now, former Vice President Dick Cheney, very involved. But the people that are in that system that come up to a certain level of politics, they're not going to share that information with other people. And if someone gets into the presidency or a key position in the Senate who doesn't know, they're not going to know. So let me give you the criteria about whether you're in the need to know or not. It's whether you came up through the system and you're willing to cooperate with the agenda of the secrecy. If it sounds like if they'll do a psychological profile, I call it a soul biopsy. You know, I'm a doctor, so but where they actually look at your values, and if they think that you will not go along with that agenda, they won't tell you anything. I don't care if you're the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So now, if you're someone who would go along with that agenda, they'll read you into some of it or brief you on some of it. The military term for being briefed or and included in a classified project is read in. But so it isn't based on your rank. This is one of the things I had to learn very early and that was Clinton's problem. They didn't trust that if he was read in, that he wouldn't go along with the agenda. So they basically waved him off, threatened him, and gave him, opportunities after he left the presidency. So he became friends with George H.W. Bush and made a lot of money in speaking fees in the oil emirates in the Mideast. And, look, that's how the game is played. The head of Army this guy, General Stubblebine in 92, after we had this encounter on the beach, he personally offered me $2 billion if I would be quiet and work with his operation on this. And that was a serious offer. That was $1 billion was a lot of money.